Welcome to our second sustainability conference, The Calm Before the Storm. This conference would not have been possible without the organizing committee, the SAS Secretariat, and last not but least, our sponsors. Ladies and gentlemen, from time to time, actuaries have embraced new areas. For example, about 2 decades ago, actuaries had started to learn to understand the basics of cat modeling, since natural catastrophes tend to be the largest number on the balance sheet of insurers and reinsurers. Being the financial engineers of an insurance company and one of the key professions in the entire insurance industry, the actuarial profession is evolving with and alongside the insurance industry. Actuaries have also started to understand emerging risks such as cyber and most recently artificial intelligence. Another very important area actuaries are increasingly getting themselves involved in is sustainability. For the next 2 days, we have lined up a distinguished panel of speakers for you, based in Singapore and elsewhere in the world. I'm pleased to introduce our distinguished keynote speaker, Professor Paul Sweeting. Paul is a senior advisor at the Hassana investment company and an honorary professor of actuarial science at the University of Kent. He is a fellow and president-elect of the Institute and Faculty of Actuaries. Paul has been a volunteer for the profession for many years, particularly in the area of enterprise risk management. He helped design the professional enterprise risk management subject, wrote the accompanying textbook, and served as a principal examiner for a number of years. Paul is also a fellow of the Chartered Institute for Securities and Investment, the Royal Statistical Society, and the Royal Society of Arts. In addition, Paul is a Chartered Enterprise Risk Actuary and a CFA charter holder. He holds a PhD in economics from the University of Bristol. Besides the textbook Paul has written, did you know that Paul has also written a detective novel and also a children's picture book? You may want to get a copy for your child. Make sure you get one before it's sold out. The importance of sustainability becomes more widely appreciated, and no surprise, actuaries are keener than ever to get involved. But what are the opportunities and how can actuaries find them? Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together virtually if you want to for Professor Paul Sweeting, who is going to give us some insights on exactly that. Over to you, Paul.
Thank you very much, Andreas. In terms of the book being sold out, the children's picture books print on demand, so that'll never happen. But the demand has so far been very low, so there's been no strains on that. Let me just share my screen. So, what I'm going to talk about is actuaries and sustainability and how they are involved and how they can be involved in the future, at least as far as I see it. And I'm sure that this won't be exhaustive, and there'll be stuff that I've missed. But I think that a lot of the principles that we're looking at here are principles that apply to any kind of work that actuaries want to get involved in, that they aren't involved in or aren't as involved in as they'd like to be. So the way that I've put this together is in terms of a number of questions that we want to answer. The questions being what, why, where, how, who, and when. I could have added whence, wherefore, whither, But we've only got less than half an hour for the keynote, so this will do. And these are a fairly standard set of questions, but they can be applied to this issue of sustainability. So, what is actuarial sustainability work? And this is, I think, an important question, because it does encompass many different areas which are distinct, and some are current and some are potential. And it's worth thinking about, what is sustainability work generally? What does sustainability cover? Because most people, I think, when they think about sustainability, they think about ESG type stuff, or actually, really, they think about the E type stuff, the environmental side of things. And there is a lot there on that, but there's also things like gender diversity. There's things like ethnic diversity. There's areas like equality more generally, so equality of opportunity, inclusion. There's access to water, access to health. All of these are sustainability areas. And one of the key areas that kind of brings these together, that actually often get involved in, is around sustainability disclosure, which often implies to insurers, pension schemes, and asset managers. And this means that actuaries are involved in this. So a lot of the regulations feature this kind of aspect of sustainability, just reporting on what is going on. And if the knowledge of what is going on and the impact on liabilities is needed, then actuaries will tend to get involved. So you've got things like many of these are in the EU. So the non-financial reporting directive, which was superseded by the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, and the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. All of these require companies to disclose various issues relating to sustainability, and a lot of it is around environmental sustainability, although there are requirements around other areas. In the UK, we've got climate-related financial disclosure regulations. You've got IFRS S1 and S2 sustainability disclosures, which are based around the task force for I forget the name now, TFRD, the task force looking at mainly carbon-related disclosures. So all of these disclosures require calculations to be done. The calculations are not necessarily technically that difficult. So think about the IFRS ones. You're looking at greenhouse gas emissions, and you're looking at scope 1, which is what a firm actually produces, scope 2, which is based on the energy which it uses, scope 3, which is further down the value chain. And there's large tomes which tell you how you carry out these calculations. And actuaries can absolutely get involved with these because, it's numbers, and what's not to like. But is it strictly actuarial sustainability work? If you're doing it for an insurance company, perhaps. Otherwise, arguably, but not definitively. More generally, if you think about what actuarial sustainability work is, another way of thinking about it, and this is which goes back to some of the EU disclosure regulations, is in terms of double materiality. So double materiality means you've got two views of sustainability. You've got the outside-in view and the inside-out view. So the outside-in view is what's the impact of the environment on a firm? How's what's happening out there in relation to things like climate change? How is that impacting what a firm does? What's going to happen to a firm's bottom line? What action a firm is going to have to take, and so on. And then you've got the inside-out view, which is what is the firm doing, which is having an impact on the environment. So if you're looking at the inside-out view, that goes much more towards the scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions. What is it that it is doing, and what could it change in terms of its impact on the environment? Now, the outside-in view for many firms is going to be things like it's going to be things like, what risks have I got to my property, to the real estate that I own, which might be affected by climate change? Or it might be, given there's changes which are going to need to be made in terms of moves from fossil fuels to more sustainable forms of energy, is that going to impact my bottom line? Am I going to have to pay more? Am I going to have to pay to improve the energy efficiency of my buildings, and so on? But if you're an insurance company, you've got a much more direct impact, which is how is climate change, for example, going to affect the premiums that I need to charge or the reserves that I need to hold, especially if you're in reinsurance potentially, because you're trying to deal with all the catastrophe risks. So I mean, that's one key aspect of actuarial sustainability, is, am I charging enough for the premiums, given what I know about climate change, given what other people are telling me about climate change? And that is an important aspect, because when you're looking at a lot of this, a lot of it's using existing projections. So it's using stuff which non-actuaries are putting together for the various reports, studies on what the impact of climate change might be, and then taking this data and applying it to actuarial use cases. So this is quite interesting, because it is it's actuarial sustainability work, but actuaries are applying other people's projections. Now this isn't unique. I mean, if you think about life insurance, a lot of actuarial life insurance work involves using longevity projections which haven't been created by actuaries necessarily. So in the UK, for example, the Office for National Statistics produces a lot of the longevity projections, and those projections still get used by actuaries, even though the actuaries aren't producing that data. So, there's nothing shameful about the fact that actuaries aren't necessarily producing all of the underlying information which goes into the actuarial calculations, but it is currently, at least, an aspect of actuarial sustainability work. It's taking other people's projections and then applying them to actuarial use cases. But having said this, there is scope for actuaries to develop these projections themselves, and to use the skills that actuaries have to come up with the projections that go into these actuarial use cases, and go into a whole range of other use cases. And similarly, if you look at longevity risk, sure, that a lot of longevity projections aren't produced by actuaries, but there's quite a few that are as well, because looking into the future, making financial sense of the future, as Society of Actuaries used to have its strapline, is a very actuarial activity. So that's some of the what, and it is only some of the what, but let's move on to the why. Why should actuaries do this work? And again, this isn't going to be exhaustive, but I think it picks up some of the main features. For a start, some of this work does require domain knowledge. If you're doing stuff in the insurance space, in the pension space, even in the investment space, these are or can be core actuarial areas. It's one of the things which helps me a lot in my career, not necessarily in relation to sustainability, but if you look at a lot of people that work in investment, a lot of people are in investment because asset managers want to sell their products to insurance companies and pension schemes. And if you're selling things to insurance companies and pension schemes, then it helps to understand how insurance companies and pension schemes work, what risks they are investing against, and how those risks are calculated and assessed. So you understand the context of what you're doing. So similarly for sustainability work, if you're looking at sustainability in relation to insurance companies and pension schemes, it helps to understand what those institutions are doing and how they work, and how they might view sustainability, the context in which they might view sustainability. So if any of this stuff requires domain knowledge, then you've got a bit of a head start as an actuary, because you should really understand those domains. But even if it doesn't, even if you're looking more broadly, and if you're looking at things like producing the underlying projections themselves, well, that requires modeling skills, and actuaries are pretty good at modeling. We've got a broad range of areas of modeling that we have got involved in, and a lot of those are transferable skills into sustainability. So it's worth looking at the stuff that actuaries do and have done across a range of areas, and just trying to see how that could transfer across. And I'll talk about that a bit more later on. But this is again something which I've been interested in for a long time, that the transferability of skills across different areas. I mean, it was something which led to me writing that book on enterprise risk management, because that came from a paper on modeling and managing risk. And one of the things that struck me was, if you looked at things like, say, non-life insurance and credit risk, in both cases, you've got the chance of something happening, which might happen or it might not happen. And if it does happen, you've got a particular chance of loss. And it's true for both non-life insurance, and it's true for credit risk. But the techniques that we used were quite different for both of these. That is less the case now, because there has been a kind of cross-fertilization of ideas from these two areas, because you can see that what you're trying to do is you're trying to model the same kind of types of uncertainty in these different areas, so they could both learn from each other. And if you're looking at things like climate change, which is probably one of the easiest, the most transferable areas for actuaries, you're looking at something which is going to be happening with particular values at some point in the future, say temperature change. And you've got a starting point now, and you've got some ranges of outcomes that you might have. That's pretty similar to a lot of investment work. So there is an awful lot of transferability of the skills that we currently have that we could move to sustainability. Why else should actuaries do this work? Well, a lot of this work requires communication, and actuaries are good at communicating stuff. Well, they certainly should be. I mean, actuaries have to do more than just crunch numbers. If all we did was crunch numbers, then we will be far less successful than we are, because one of the key actuarial tasks is not just crunching the numbers, but then explaining them to people who aren't actuaries, and being able to translate what we do into something which is comprehensible by people that don't necessarily think in binary and can't deal with matrix multiplication off the top of their head. We need to be able to translate stuff which is often very complex into the ways which can be understood more broadly. And this is something which, it's not just something which actuaries can do, it's something which we're trained to do. I mean, we actually have, in the IFOA at least, we have examinations in communication to make sure that we can not just do the sums, but we can communicate the answers to a wide range of stakeholders that need to understand them. But all of this as well requires being able to take a strategic view, being able to step back and look at what the bigger picture is. Now, there's something I've been talking about quite a bit recently about the actuarial exams in the UK, and the fact that there's two tiers to these exams. The first half of the exams, the technical ones, when you look at the paper, you look at the question and you have to be able to work out the answer. The later ones, you look at the paper and you have to be able to work out what's the question. As in, you need to be able to understand what's really being asked. You need to be able to take a step back and say, okay, what are we really trying to do here? Which is very relevant to a lot of actuarial work. It's also very relevant to sustainability, to be able to take a step back and say, okay, what are we really trying to do with this question that is being asked, this problem that we're being faced with? And trying to pull together all these different aspects in terms of the context, the domain, the type of modeling that's really required to get to the answer that we need, and how to communicate this information to the people that are going to use it in a way which is going to best help them be able to answer the questions that they have. So where are these jobs? I think there's two aspects to this again. There's jobs which currently involve actuaries and jobs which could involve actuaries. I think a lot of the actuaries that are working in sustainability, they're working in insurance companies, not just with disclosures, but in terms of premium rating, in terms of trying to make sure that the prices that they're charging are appropriate for the risks that they're taking on. You've also got a lot of actuaries working in asset management, and a lot of this is around products which have a sustainability aspect to them. And it's partly ensuring that those products are ticking the appropriate boxes to be classed as sustainable. But I think it's also about trying to display the merits of these products and the implications of using them to various investors. So it is broad sustainability work, but I think a lot of it is done by actuaries who aren't necessarily applying an actuarial lens to sustainability. It's just actuaries who strongly believe in the merits of sustainable investment and are using their influence and their positions to be able to cheerlead for these investments, which is important. And it's similar to a lot of actuaries that I know who work in investments who don't necessarily work in actuarial roles anymore, but work in roles as in terms of sales. That they're using their clout to be able to add value here. And then you've got consultancies who are advising insurers in particular on steps they can take. And there's some really interesting work going on here, not just in terms of disclosures, but in terms of some of the stochastic aspects of sustainability, which haven't really been there in the forefront so far. A lot of it's been scenario-based, and there's a lot of scope for stochastic work. There's also scope for work in academia, in government. We could be doing more in consultancy and consulting not just to insurers, but to a wider range of stakeholders. So there is more that we could be doing. So how do we get actuaries to work in these areas? Well, how we don't do it, I think, is to say, well, what you need is an actuary. I think nobody has ever said, successfully, to solve this problem, what you need is an actuary, unless it's some sort of regulatory role. We get hired because we can solve problems, not because we've got letters after our names. And I think we need to recognize that when we are looking for roles in sustainability. And I think the easiest way to do this is by adjacency. So it's not trying to parachute ourselves into completely separate areas. It's more about trying to look at what the closest actuarial roles are to the roles that we want to get to, which is why getting in through insurance is often a good way. And if through insurance we can develop projections which could be used more broadly, I mean, that's quite a good way of doing it. But I'm more fundamentally, if you look at where we want to get to, then you look at how we get close to those roles and how we can get close enough to show that we can solve these problems and problems that relate to sustainability. That's a broad strategy on how we get to areas that we want to get to. And it's not just about taking opportunities, but it's also about making the opportunities as well. So, as individuals, network inside and outside your firm, go to conferences. And whilst these virtual conferences are excellent for communicating the how to do things, some of the in-person conferences, that's one of the ways that you can really get to know people that might be able to help. And dare I say it, going to non-actuarial conferences is going to be a way to network with the people that you want to work with. Join working parties, join interested groups, write articles. I mean, I started writing articles years ago on longevity modeling because I thought it was interesting. I thought I had something to add. I'd never worked in longevity before. I ended up getting a job in longevity, developing a longevity reinsurance product and being hired as an academic because I worked in longevity. So, just going out there and doing stuff is a really good way of putting yourself forward. So that is nearly it. I think that one of the things that remains is, who can do this? In theory, anybody can do it, but I think it is more suited to some people than to others. It's partly it's partly suited to people who've got domain knowledge that they can leverage, but you've also got to build on the knowledge of sustainability. I think people who are interested in modelling, they've got experience that can be built on, and I think it's important to recognise some of the skill transferability. So, as I was saying before, if you're looking at climate change modelling, time series analysis that you see in longevity, that you see in investment, ARIMA processes, things like that, they could be really useful in climate change modelling if you're looking stochastically. Dimensional reduction techniques. I was talking to someone the other day about how you could use this to help model sustainability on a more granular basis, looking at the impact of climate change across different areas. I mean, principal component analysis, singular value decomposition, those get used in investment and longevity as well. The Lee Carter model, that's dimensional reduction technique. That could be used in climate change modeling when you're trying to look on a more granular level. So there's a lot of things that we already do that could be transferred over to sustainability. But because actuaries have a great breadth of knowledge, I think that gives us the scope to do something broader than perhaps is currently being done in, say, climate change modeling. So that's something which I think, again, being actuaries, we tend to look at things from a much higher vantage point than other specialists might do. And, just finish on the words of Frank Reddington, the actuary. He said, an actuary that is just an actuary isn't an actuary. So I think if we're able to leverage this ability to look at stuff at a high level and leverage the fact that we tend to look across a broad range of areas, that is one of the ways that actuaries are going to get more into sustainability work and add value in a way that I believe that we can. So thank you for inviting me here to be your keynote speaker. I hope that was interesting and gives people some food for thought. And I wish you all the best for the remainder of this conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul.